Week 6 of SNL is a bit of a look into an alternate universe. As I mentioned before, when Lorne was initially conceiving his variety show idea, he'd intended on a rotating set of hosts who'd each do 4 or 5 episodes per season. The names which were floated most often as possibilities were George Carlin, Richard Pryor, and Lily Tomlin, as well as Steve Martin and even Albert Brooks and Billy Crystal. At some point well before the show reached air, they'd changed the format to feature a different host each week, but the negotiations with Carlin, Pryor, and Tomlin had already been finalized. I think most folks can agree that it's a good thing that the earlier format of the show didn't make it to air. Carlin didn't enjoy his experience and refused to fully participate. Tomlin, as we'll discuss, was not exactly beloved by the crew during her week there, and Pryor's appearance the next week would present its own minefield of issues. Better at least to have an entirely new potential catastrophe to deal with each week, rather than to keep dealing with the same ones over and over. Lily Tomlin is one of the more consequential figures in the early history of NBC's Saturday Night. When Lorne's early stints in LA as a writer had not proved especially successful and he had considered returning to Canada, he was working on a pilot with Tomlin which gave him the confidence to give it another shot. Tomlin's successful ABC specials had become a springboard for both she and Lorne, who produced them, as well as an early meeting grounds for some of the writers and cast who'd later join him on SNL. In a 1979 Rolling Stone interview, Lorne said, "Lily looked at my stuff from Canada and asked me to work with her. The first time we met, we spent about 7 hours talking. She was probably the formative influence on me. She was the first person I met who really cared about quality and getting it all right. At a point when I had very little self-confidence, she said, 'I appreciate you and I appreciate your work.'" Tomlin was well known as Judy Carnes' replacement on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and for the aforementioned Primetime Network specials, as well as for 3 comedy albums she'd released up to that point. By virtue of her work on Laugh-In, she was perhaps the most conventionally popular comedic host up to this point. Lily Tomlin's own material, though, is the type I personally respond to more by saying, "Oh, that's clever," rather than by actually laughing at it. She's humorous, but not funny, almost as if I'd rather be reading many of her jokes than listening to her deliver them. Call me a Philistine, but Chevy's physical buffoonery in the cold open got more of a chuckle out of me than just about anything Lily did or said in this entire episode. I will, of course, try not to let that get in the way of telling you about her performance, but I thought I should probably mention that I wasn't in stitches for an hour over here. While it's certainly not the norm, there have been several instances over the years of a host doing double duty as a music guest. Such guests are usually musicians themselves, however, so I'm not entirely certain who thought it would be a good idea for Lily Tomlin to try it. She's perfectly serviceable here in her performance of St. James Infirmary, hits all the notes in a satisfactory fashion, but I have trouble sussing out why they thought this was the thing to do. Bonus points, by the way, for Michael O'Donoghue's suggestion the band wear nurse uniforms for the performance, and for piano player Paul Schaefer's Elton John sunglasses and Larry Fine hair. They'd come back to close the episode for a number in B flat with the Bs. I won't bore you with more details. It is exactly what I just said, and nothing more. Chevy seems to have just decided not to do his phone joke this week. Okay. Maybe they were running behind on time. "I'm Chevy and you're not" gets a less than glowing response this week. This week in topical humor, Ford still clumsy, Secret Service still wrestling stuff to the ground, actor Ronald Reagan is running for president, and General Francisco Franco has died, which would become a running gag for some inexplicable reason. The ad break is for Spud Beer, the beer brewed for people who can't taste the difference, and features a man who's just came out of electroshock therapy as the spokesperson. I'm glad I wasn't in need of psychiatric treatment or beer in the 70s based on this ad. Charles Schultz is introducing a Peanuts replacement for Woodstock named Altamont, depicted as a Hell's Angel who will beat the other birds to death with a pool cue. This is, of course, a reference to the Altamont Speedway Free Festival, a 1969 outdoor rock concert that ended in violence and tragedy. There is no possibility this gag was written by anyone other than Michael O'Donoghue. It's too dark. Finally, Garrett returns to provide his news for the hard of hearing. This makes several weeks in a row, so I'm waiting for them to do something a little different with it! This week marks the first time the Muppets interact with real people, and it's a minor improvement. That is, it's a minor improvement until Scred convinces Tomlin to join her in a duet of Sonny and Cher's "I've Got You, Babe," at which point I quit watching. Sorry guys, but I only signed up for so much horror when I took this gig, and this frickin' comedy abortion crosses that line and keeps going. Seriously though, whose idea was it to have Lily Tomlin sing this much? She's not incapable of holding a pitch, but it's hardly a strong suit for her. It's a strange choice.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
This week sees Chevy reprise his low-effort impression of President Ford with a tagline reading, "This is not a good impression of Gerald Ford, but Rich Little won't work for scale." I've already mentioned how groundbreaking this whole business of doing a bad impersonation was, so let's just focus on how expertly Chase manages these sight gags. Answering the water glass when the phone rings, juggling the calls between the two phones, the business with the charts leading into the tumble. He really was a virtuoso of this kind of physical comedy, easily the heir to his hero Ernie Kovacs in The Art of the Pratfall.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
In which Belushi plays a distraught Ludwig von Beethoven. Mrs. Beethoven, played by Gilda, tries to convince him to eat, but he is, alas, too lost in ennui. She leaves the room, and suddenly he's struck with inspiration. Belushi strikes a wonderfully bemused look as if he can't quite explain what's happening as his fingers begin to play a jaunty little ragtime number, the likes of which wouldn't be written for a few hundred years. The whole sketch is just Belushi's expressions, but it works somehow. A repeat of the pre-taped Triopenin ad from episode 1. As an aside, this episode also repeats the Albert Brooks film from that episode. I'll no longer be mentioning tape pieces after their first appearance, but know that they frequently were reused during the first couple of years of the show. The land shark is back, terrorizing the denizens of that same apartment building with the pink walls. It's cute and everything. Dan and John enthusiastically chew the scenery as detectives. Aykroyd writhing on the floor after being hit with a mallet may be the funniest thing in the sketch, actually. And Chevy's obviously having fun being shark, but I get the feeling they're already running out of ideas with where to go with these sketches. My supposition is sort of burnt out by the fact that this particular one ends with a cutout ending where Chevy comes over the PA and tells them sketches run long and they don't have time to finish. Then Tomlin complains about their shoddy treatment before being eaten by the shark. It's a strange, fourth wall breaking way out of a sketch that was sort of meandering towards a non-ending, and I'm not sure if the studio audience knew quite what to make of it. SNL was, of course, not the first sketch show to come up with a creative way to end stubborn sketches. See also Monty Python and Dropping the Cow. In which a couple, portrayed by Garrett and Jane, are interrupted while making out by the busboy, played by Chevy. Mortified, Chevy drops the newspaper he was carrying as he profusely apologizes for the intrusion and tries to hide his discomfort while picking up the various sections. It's an old gag, just a bit of physical comedy made a little bit more modern and daring by the somewhat progressive inclusion of an interracial couple, but it works. Tomlin's Edith Ann character originated on Laugh-In, but remained a part of her repertoire long after she left the show, appearing on Sesame Street and as a fixture in her live performances. This film is, to me, her highlight as host. Edith gives Lily a chance to showcase her talent for character work. She's a better actor, if you ask me, than a monologuist, and she nails both the physical and vocal affectations of a 5-and-a-half-year-old. Ludwig, still depressed, is causing the ladies much distress. They leave, and he dejectedly picks around on the piano for a moment before stumbling on the riff for My Girl, which he slips into with his German accent. It's silly, but the crowd responds. Gilda comes out to deliver the news that the program will be off air for 2 weeks, so...
I'm Gilda, and they sent me out here to tell you that there won't be any Saturday night for 2 weeks. Or there will be Saturday night, but we won't be here, so you can go out on dates and stuff, or you can ask me out on the dates, and
to promote the Pryor show and their Christmas episode with Bergen returning. You just can't help but love Gilda. I see why they send her out for these sorts of things. In which Tomlin portrays a sorority member writing a letter to her sister, Patty Hearst. Look, I was born in 1981, so I had to look up what the hell this one was referencing. Hearst was an heiress who was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a leftist terrorist group, and forced to take part in bank robberies and bombings. Apparently the joke is that Tomlin's character here was a fellow student at Berkeley with Hearst and is writing a letter of disapproval at how Sister Hearst had been making the sorority look bad through her actions. Lorraine plays another sister who tries to set Tomlin straight that the SLA doesn't mean sister the way that the sorority does, but Tomlin isn't hearing it. Listen, as much time as I just spent explaining that premise to you, I'm just going to end my synopsis by saying it's not funny and doesn't work. Extra not working for me points added because Tomlin sings again, this time quite poorly. Why did they think having her sing so much was a good idea? I keep thinking she won't do it again, and she keeps doing it again. in which we finally get a bit more of a punchline. Ludwig hasn't eaten in weeks, but still at least shows some interest in his snuff box. He does a few snorts from it in a manner that looks very much like doing cocaine, mind you, dons some sunshades, and then launches into a Ray Charles number. The crowd really responds to Belushi's excellent Ray Charles. The wife and servant come back to sing back up, and comedy ensues. It's good stuff. Another strong showing for Tomlin here. This sketch has her instructing the ladies at their new jobs as construction workers. Rather than teaching them how to do the job, however, she's teaching them how to catcall and harass men passing by on the street. She brings Danny out to serve as a test dummy for them and proceeds to humiliate and degrade him. I'll step in here to interject that Rosie Schuster and Ann Bates originally wrote this part for Belushi, who flatly refused to participate. Unlike later SNL cast member Chris Farley, Belushi found displaying his girthy physique for comedic purposes beneath his dignity. Beside that, he didn't care much for Tomlin. Truth be told, John often professed to not find women funny. He was gracious toward the ladies on the show, especially Gilda, but he could be quite harsh in his assessment and treatment of guests, especially confident and vocal women. The ladies get some great lines, and I think this is the strongest live material of the episode by far. It makes its point, it's funny, and it's just the right length as well. Extra credit added for Aykroyd, who is better as the put-upon model than Belushi would have been anyway. Schuster noted that he looked like he felt naked and vulnerable, just the way the women on the street feel. Ann Bates gets to have a turn on screen as a frantically productive housewife who keeps up with her insanely busy schedule, not with the help of Jamitol, but with the help of miracle product, speed. It's literally just speed. This may not make sense to us these days, but I know from my own mom that the abuse of diet drugs was an open secret among ladies in the 60s and 70s, so this is a pretty effective parody if you ask me. Bates is also pretty great as the tweaked out lady. A character piece in which Tomlin plays a 1950s teenager gossiping about her classmates at a sock hop. Let's just remind ourselves for a second that this aired in 1975, so the character she's portraying is a 20-year-old stereotype of what mean girl teens used to be like. And I mean, it totally succeeds at that. She nails the dialect and hits all the marks, and the crowd seems to go along with her on the whole thing. My question is just like, why? This is kind of what I meant earlier when I said I just don't get Tomlin. She's unquestionably unique and maybe even brilliant, but I just don't find myself laughing at any of this, and I have trouble imagining the thought process that led her to pitch this idea for SNL and for everyone else in the room to decide, yes, let's do the sock hop monologue to close the show. I'm really interested to see what kind of material she brings when she hosts the show again in a season or two. According to Hill and Weingrad's Backstage History of SNL, both Belushi and O'Donoghue largely refused to work with Tomlin, finding her prickly and over-picky about the material she would and wouldn't do. Personally, I think both men had issues working with women. Marilyn Miller and Tomlin both recall O'Donoghue becoming agitated with Tomlin at some point and fixing her with what they called an evil eye, certainly intended to intimidate, but which had the effect of breaking Tomlin into a fit of laughter. It wasn't only the boys who were to blame for the acrimonious atmosphere, though. The female writers had all been looking forward to Tomlin hosting, but were disappointed when little of their material other than the construction worker sketch made it to air. I've read similar criticism from writer Margaret Oberman about Tomlin's dismissive attitude toward the women writers in her later appearance, but I'll reserve my judgment on that show until I've seen it. After the 2-week break Gilda mentioned, the show would return with another massively anticipated guest, Richard Pryor. That episode contains some absolute classic SNL moments and firsts, and lots of interesting backstage happenings as well. Stay tuned next week.